All right, listeners, get ready for today's deep dive. We're going to tackle some assumptions head on and really try to untangle the whole action research versus scientific method thing.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, how it goes.
Yeah.
You've got your own ideas about how each one works,
Mm-hmm.
and some people even see them as like total opposites.
Yeah.
But we're going to bring in a super interesting article to the mix and see if we can shake things up a bit.
I'm all for shaking things up.
So to guide us on this little intellectual adventure, we have Herman Aquinas.
Aquinas.
Yeah, it rhymes with beer.
Oh, cool.
And his 1993 article from the Journal of Applied Behavioral Science called Action Research and Scientific Method, Presumed Discrepancies and Actual Similarity.
Okay, I like where this is going already.
Right.
Yeah.
So Aquinas, he's making this really compelling case against the common perception that action research and the scientific method are like oil and water.
Yeah, you hear that a lot.
He even goes so far as to say that the scientific method isn't the only valid way to gain knowledge.
And he's right. Other fields like philosophy and theology, they have their own rigorous systems for understanding the world.
Totally. But okay, let's get back to our main event, action research versus scientific method.
Let's do it.
So the article highlights this classic image of the scientist in their lab, all about detached observation, right?
Yeah.
Versus the action researcher out in the field actively shaking things up. Do you think that's an accurate portrayal?
Well, it's definitely a simplification. Aquinas points out that even in so-called action research, there's often a reliance on those good old-fashioned scientific methods, particularly when it comes to evaluating the impact of interventions. Like he uses the example of organization development, which is considered a form of action research.
Yeah.
But it often uses traditional scientific methods for assessment.
So we're already starting to see that the lines are blurring a bit.
Definitely.
But Aquinas, he doesn't stop there. He dives into these three assumed discrepancies between action research and the scientific method.
Oh, yeah, the discrepancies. Tell me about those.
Okay, so the first one he tackles is this idea of multivariable causality.
Multivariable causality.
Yeah. The fact that in the real world, things rarely have just one single cause.
Right. It's never that simple.
And this is where people often criticize the classic scientific method. They say it's too focused on isolating variables and doesn't really capture how complex reality is.
Yeah, it's like, come on, science. The world isn't a perfectly controlled experiment.
Exactly. But what does Aquinas say to that? Does he think science is doomed to oversimplify everything?
Not quite. He argues that despite the classic image of a scientist controlling for every single variable, there are actually ways for the scientific method to handle complex causality.
Really?
Yeah, things like systems thinking and certain statistical methods can account for multiple interacting factors.
So you're telling me that even though science loves to isolate variables, it has ways of dealing with the messy real world?
It does. It's more adaptable than people give it credit for.
That makes me feel better about using scientific findings to guide my actions.
Me.
Okay. I'm also super curious about that second discrepancy, the one that deals with control groups.
Oh, yes. Control groups. Always a hot topic.
It's like, how do you even create a control group when you're trying to improve a company's culture or address a community health issue?
Right.
It seems almost impossible to isolate those variables in a real-world setting.
It definitely presents some challenges, but Aquinas suggests that it's not about ditching control groups altogether. It's more about adapting the concept to fit the context of action research.
Okay, so how do you do that?
Well, for example, you might compare outcomes across different time periods or use a waitlist control group where one group gets the intervention first and another group gets it later.
So it's more about finding creative ways to introduce comparison points,
Exactly.
even if it doesn't perfectly mirror the controlled environment of a lab.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay, what about that final discrepancy, the one about data?
Ah, yes, the classic qualitative versus quantitative debate.
Hit me with it.
So some people argue that the scientific method is all about numbers, hard data, statistical analysis. Right.
While action research embraces the messiness of qualitative data, like interviews, observations, subjective experiences.
And I guess the assumption is that qualitative data is somehow less rigorous or scientific.
That's often the implication. But Aquinas pushes back against that idea.
Good.
He argues that both types of data have value and can contribute to a more holistic understanding of a phenomenon.
I like that.
He even points out that even traditional scientific studies are increasingly incorporating qualitative methods to gain richer insights.
Which makes total sense. Numbers can tell you what's happening, but qualitative data can help you understand why it's happening and what it means for the people involved. I'm starting to see that these supposed discrepancies are more like false dichotomies.
I think that's a great way to put it. Aquinas is essentially arguing that action research and the scientific method are not mutually exclusive. They're more like points on a spectrum.
Interesting.
And to take it a step further, he suggests that this perception of separation might be a relatively recent phenomenon.
Oh, really? Possibly stemming from the emergence of distinct academic disciplines and research paradigms
Yeah.
back in the mid-20th century.
So maybe it's less about a fundamental incompatibility and more about historical circumstances
Exactly.
and those academic silos we all love to hate.
Exactly. And to illustrate that point, he brings up Kurt Lewin, who's considered a pioneer of action research.
Lewin.
Yeah, Lewin was actually deeply rooted in the scientific tradition.
Huh.
And he saw action research not as a replacement for the scientific method, but as a way to bridge the gap between theory and practice.
Which, again, makes perfect sense.
Right.
If you're trying to address real-world problems, why wouldn't you want to draw on the best of both worlds? The rigor of scientific inquiry and the practical on-the-ground approach of action research.
It's the best of both worlds.
Aquinas even hints that this perceived division might be starting to fade.
He does. He points to the growing recognition among researchers that both approaches have valuable contributions to make. And he suggests that this convergence could lead to new and innovative ways of tackling complex issues.
It's like we're finally moving past this either-or mindset,
Yeah.
and embracing a more nuanced, both-hand approach to research.
I like it.
But okay, let's zoom out for a second and think about what this all means.
Okay.
What are the key takeaways from Aquinas' work? Why should our listeners care about these seemingly obscure academic debates?
I think the most important takeaway is that action research and the scientific method are not these sworn enemies they're often made out to be.
Right.
Aquinas challenges that whole notion that there are these fundamental, irreconcilable differences between them.
And I think what's really exciting about that is the potential it unlocks. If these two approaches can actually work together, it could revolutionize the way we tackle those big, messy problems that plague our world.
Oh, absolutely.
Things like climate change, social inequality, public health crises.
All of that. Imagine combining the scientific method's rigor in hypothesis testing and data analysis with action research's focus on real-world context and stakeholder involvement.
That's a potent combination.
It is.
It's like having the best of both worlds, right?
It's the best of both worlds.
You can draw on scientific knowledge to inform effective action.
Right.
And at the same time, use the process of taking action to generate new knowledge and refine our understanding.
Exactly. It creates this beautiful cycle of learning and doing.
Yes.
Where theory and practice inform and enrich each other. It's not just about sitting in an ivory tower generating knowledge. It's about applying that knowledge to make a real difference in the world.
Exactly. And I think that brings us to the thought-provoking question I always like to leave our listeners with.
Ooh, I love these questions.
If, as Aquinas argues, these two approaches can work together, what exciting new possibilities does that open up? What kind of impact could we have if we fully embrace this integration?
It's an incredibly exciting prospect. I think it has the potential to lead to more effective solutions, more relevant research, and a deeper understanding of the complex challenges we face.
So, dear listener, there you have it, another deep dive complete. We hope you've come away with a fresh perspective on action research and the scientific method, and maybe even a little inspiration to go out and shake things up in your own world. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.